One thing that is really neat at night is to photograph when you have some sort of water to deal with. Now, you've seen that already in a couple of images. You've seen that with rain. And when you have rain and wet pavements in the city, great, because you get the reflections of all the lights. And you get the colors and stuff. It can be really, really cool. Something that you might not know, but I think is really fascinating, is that Hollywood very often will wet down streets just to get the reflections. So sometimes if you really look closely at those night scenes, you go, wait a minute, what happened with this rain? Was there rain here? I mean, this was a sunny day and we haven't seen any rain, but yet you get these wet streets. The reason they do that is because it makes it more dramatic. You get the reflections of so much. So you saw a little bit of that. But anytime that you get water reflecting lights can be really, really cool. You also saw the twilight scenes where you had the light reflecting the sky that I showed you in the landscape. Also a really cool effect. Well, I want to go a little bit farther with water and talk a little bit more about it and how we can find really interesting photographs when we look for water and the lights reflecting in that water. Now here's a picture that was shot in Portland, in Oregon, and it's got a lot of reflections. I mean, you can see the city up in the background. Here's a bridge, and all of the lights are reflecting down below. This is shot after sunset. We've talked about shooting after sunset, and it's late enough after sunset that the lights are coming on in the city. You can see the buildings up here have lights. We've got a lot of reflections all the way down through here. A lot of different things are reflecting into the water, and the water is creating a really important part of the picture. Without that water, yeah, it would be kind of interesting. And if we were to block off that bottom part of the picture, you would see the city, I think, is kind of interesting against the sky, and the bridge is nice. But with that water and all the reflections that are there, really, really cool. That's what makes pictures like this really work strongly. Now, this was shot with the camera on a tripod, so I'm making sure that it's absolutely locked down. So I can use also a lower ISO setting. So using a lower ISO setting to make sure that I'm getting the best quality in terms of color and in terms of noise, so I don't have those problems, and actually in tonalities as well. So that's all working together quite well for this picture. This is not a super long exposure. The water, if you look closely at it, actually down here you can see the ripples, is because there is some movement to the water, but I haven't done a multi-second exposure. It's not like a 20-second exposure or something like that, where this would just totally smooth out. And this particular picture was about a second exposure or so. So it's long enough that it brings in all the detail, but it's not so long as to smooth out the water. Still, I like the effect. I like the way that all those reflections are going on. And that's what you look for. You'll notice, too, that I've kept the framing high. There's a little bit of sky in the picture. That's to hold a little bit of detail. And there's still a little bit of blue there because you'll get that little bit of blue sky long after sunset. And then the rest of the picture, though, and it's more than half of the picture, is the water. Because that color, the reflections, the tonalities are what really make this interesting and make this picture come alive. Now, here's another picture of water. You saw this in the earlier class, but I want to talk a little bit more about it. Here, a long exposure of fountains at night. Now, this is late. This is way after sunset. This is actually totally dark. The reason the sky has a little bit of tonality there is because it was a cloudy night. When you have a cloudy night, you'll get reflections from the city going up into the clouds, and they'll light up, and very often you'll pick that up. This is a long exposure because it is creating this drift of the water coming off of these fountains. But the cool thing about this is not just the long exposure and to get this really interesting pattern of the fountains, but also the reflections. And you can see those reflections are really interesting. I mean, this picture is compositionally almost, not quite, split in half. I still wanted to emphasize the fountains themselves, so they are most of the picture. But down below, we've got this nice wet pavement, this particular fountain, it has these fountains all over, so you get these spouts going all over, and this whole area stays wet. And so I actually saw that wet and framed that up. Now, a lot of times people will photograph fountains like this at night, and they'll just frame up the fountains. But we'll look for other things. Look for those reflections. Look for the interesting things that happen because it's night. And the wetness and water is such a cool thing to find. So whenever you see water at night, look for ways to reflect things in it. Look for ways to reflect light in the water because you can get some really cool shots that way.